Welcome to Horsepower Heritage. My name is Maurice Merrick. If you're into classic cars, you know one of the oldest complaints in the hobby is that too many cars get put away and never driven. They're all in private collections and no one ever sees them. Well, today I'm surrounded by probably some of the most famous and iconic cars in history, and the great thing is that this collection is 100% driven. And the man behind it is Kip Cyprus. Kip, thanks for having us today.
I'm glad you're here. Is my makeup just right? I had my hair done yesterday.
Kip, some collections have a focus, whether it's competition cars, a particular design or a particular brand. Your collection doesn't seem to have a focus necessarily.
That's what you think.
Okay, so tell me about it.
My collection is a driving collection. Maybe we don't have the most rarest or most sought after cars, but we have the most usable, and all these cars drive and run, and I drive them, and to me that's the most important thing, because I enjoy the actual usage of the cars. I like to go down the roads with them. I don't want them, I love looking at them. There's some cars that are not very driver friendly, and after a while they become a piece of art that I love looking at. But all the cars, if I can't drive it, I don't want it. I have friends that have some fantastic collections, just the most incredible things, whether it's just, cars with incredible history or real low production numbers or, or themes. I like crossover cars. There's a De Tomaso here that's it's Ford. It was a predecessor to Pantera. It's a car that was made by De Tomaso, which was a Argentinian race team, and they wanted to get on the production lines with Ford, and so they were collaborating with Ford, and they were putting Ford engines in their cars. And
the cars were built in Italy.
Yes. So
Modena, I think, but
yeah, but neatly. But I call it a crossover car, and I have I've got a dual Ghia. Bodied by Ghia. It's got a Hemi motor in it, a 1957 dual Ghia. I've got a Sunbeam Tiger, English car with a Ford motor in it. Yeah.
Right.
I like crossover cars.
Those hybrids or crossovers, yeah. One of my favorite crossovers is the ESO. Well, actually, the ESO Revolta.
Uh-huh.
That's a
So did that have the Corvette motor in it?
Yeah, 327. They're pretty big cars, and they're really their styling is not for everybody, but they definitely have that. Well, they're a big GT car. I mean, you can imagine bombing across the country in one of those. I think they're pretty stylish. Do you have a Cobra?
No.
That's like the classic, crossover,
I have
right?
A Superformance Daytona Coupe, but a Cobra's on my wish list. I've made a list. And I'm sticking to the list. A friend of mine, I learned that from him. Because if it's not on his list, he says, "Well, something's got to come off the list." Then if I get spontaneous and buy something else, but I really need to stick to the list, because there's so many great cars out there, and you want to play with different ones, and I can't afford to just go buy whatever I want. So, I save my little piggy bank, and I go when I'm ready, and I decide what I'm going to pick. But my list consists of, there's about 10 more cars on my list that I really want, and I think going through that, when I get probably to the 10th, they'll maybe have another little list. But I'm really trying to stay focused on that list.
Give us a couple that are on the list.
I'd like an Auburn, like a 36, like bowtail Auburn, late 20s, early 30s, maybe a 4.5 liter Bentley.
A pre-rolls, yeah.
I'd like to have a DB 4, 5, or 6, and I'd like to have a Cobra, a small block Cobra.
I was going to ask, do you want the 427 or the 289?
289.
Yeah, I like the 289 Cobra for sure. I was talking with one of your guys earlier, and I asked him, if Kip told you could take any car home tonight, which one would it be? And he had a hard time picking. He finally picked that 50 Oldsmobile back there. And then he asked me the same question, and I said, well, let me see here. I would take the Shelby GT350. So Kip, this all started with what, a 69 Chevy Camaro?
That was my first car. I was 17, 18 years old. I was a muscle car guy, and it was like, boy, I just wanted to have one of those cars so bad. And then once I obtained it, at first I was into street racing. And then when the cars became more classic, because this wouldn't have been quite the classic car yet, it was still kind of a hand-me-down. And then as they became more of a classic car, then I began to restore them. And then as I got more into classic car collecting, I realized that the restoration that I thought was good continually got better. And so it's been restored quite a few times.
There were plenty of Camaros still on the road from that time period. Those
Yes.
late 60s Camaros, they were kind of, I remember when they were everywhere, really.
Yeah, there was nothing. All I wanted was a super sport. So I would go in the VIN. So I would look, and there were so many fakes. You know,
Right.
people would all they had to do is put super sport on it and a couple of details, and a lot of people had. And back then, this was in the early '80s. They thought they had super sports. So you'd go in there and you'd look at the VIN, and I actually figured out how to determine that it was. And then the funny part about it is, here we are today, numbers matching, all the options, all the stuff is really important. Colors. Well, back then I just wanted to have a super sport. Then after I got the car, I took the original big block that was in it and threw it away because it wasn't cool. You wanted a small block, so it just goes to show you how far we've come and what's now important with cars and the way we've changed to collect.
That's why I think, you can never go wrong with originality if you're gonna keep a car. So many of them were highly modified, and then we went through that crazy pro street era in the 80s where everything had to be kind of like neon and big fat wheels and tires.
Yeah. How about the paint jobs when that looked like an exploding rock?
Absolutely.
The 80s pickup trucks, and they would do all the graphics on their trucks. And actually today, some of those older like Boyd builds of those
Right.
cars, they're coming back. A lot of times though, with collecting, the production numbers are so high. So when you have production numbers, especially with a Mustang, a Camaro, a Pro Street pickup truck, cars that were from really the 70s on, the economic sense of restoring a car, bringing a car back when there's so many on the road, it gets in your way of the collectability. The 70s trucks are getting pretty popular, in the late 60s, the C10s, and you look, okay, how many of these are left? And because a lot of them, if it was a high production, once enough of them have been melted down and destroyed, then now it becomes more rare.
That's a great example because, like the F100s and C10s, I mean, a lot of them were just beaten. I mean, they were work trucks. Original mint ones are going to be rare. It's like anything, but especially with pickup trucks.
Yeah.
And then the high option ones too. That's the C10 is like, it's exploded.
It really has.
It's amazing the values that the prices are getting.
And when I was a kid, a lot of guys had a C10. It was their dad's hand-me-down, and they drove those cars, and a lot of times they turned into work trucks. I'm an old soul, and I would find myself gravitating towards older guys that I would hang out with that really knew a lot about cars, and I still do. I mean, most of my friends are quite a bit older than I am, but they've got so much knowledge, and I just try to suck up everything that I can and learn from these guys. And what happens along the way, it kind of gets back to when you start crossing over and learning about other manufacturers and other kinds of cars, whether it be all the way into, like right now I'm really getting into a lot of the European cars. But from where I've come, European cars were not they were nowhere in my radar. So I'm learning everything is like new to me, and it's actually really fun because it's nice to learn things about the European cars. It's like starting all over. You get to the point where when I was in muscle, you'd know all about muscle and you learn all you can. You're a sponge, and after a while, you start learning stuff that just doesn't even matter anymore because it's too much. But now going into getting the European cars and not knowing about them, how they were manufactured, who manufactured the specialties, and what you want and what's cool and what wasn't, it's fun.
Were you one of those guys that was turning wrenches and that was part of what was great about the hobby to you, or was it more about the collecting?
Well, I'm an uneducated guy. I never went to college. Matter of fact, I got kicked out. community college. But when I was in high school, I at one point was able to finagle my way into having half my classes auto shop because I was so into it, and I couldn't wait to, now I would have like C's and everything else, and then but I would have A's in all my auto shops or my mechanical classes, and it's actually really too bad today that we don't have more vocational classes in these schools, because when I can tell you, I had plastics, metal, electric, wood, auto shop. And you think about all those little trades and things, these young people today, they don't know the first thing about any of that stuff. And that stuff does impact you when you're young and when you're exposed to it. And it's the simplest little thing, whether you're cutting a piece of wood or cutting a piece of tin or learning how to solder something, it changes you for the rest of your life.
I'm surprised at all the guys who are figuring out how to work on the computer systems in cars and all of the electronics. I mean, there's guys out there who are doing crazy stuff. They're applying that same kind of do-it-yourself attitude to cars today. Yeah. There's a guy on YouTube who buys wrecked Teslas and rebuilt them. And he's got a really good following on YouTube. He's got an amazing YouTube channel.
Now imagine that guy in 30 years when we're on to something even bigger.
Yeah, right.
Like, hey, look, this was the first guy that was doing Teslas. But when you mentioned bringing technology, I still like to get in and I build, you call them customs, not necessarily hot rods, but customs. Not Pro Street.
More of a resto mod?
Not a resto mod, but I've got some stuff like there's a in the shop here. There's a Mercury, like an old Merc, a Rocket 88 Oldsmobile, and those cars are mapped with fuel injection, but they're old technology. So they're original engines, they're original drivetrain, but yet they're mapped with electronic ignitions and fuel injection. And that's, in order to do that, the car has to be put on a computer, and they have to map it. And it's like, hey, at this RPM, we're taking this much air, this much fuel, and it takes the technology, but we can actually make them run better, more dependable. The guys that are able to do that kind of work, these guys are making more money than you would make at a dealership. And if you think about, it's like, why are those guys making so much? It's because comes back down to type person, the coach worker that can go out and do metal fabrication and has the techie mindset, go, hey, I can build this car and build this engine, and then I can integrate the modern technology of fuel injection into an old motor where you can't even see it and make this thing run way better than it ever did.
That makes me think of a lot of these old guys that are close to retirement now, and a lot of them have left the scene, but guys that you would send your gauges to, or guys that would do nothing but rebuild SU carburetors or Carter carburetors, or they had those little specialty shops, and they would get all the business because that was the guy that that everyone counted on.
Yeah, and those guys that were pretty affordable back then have now been replaced with guys that are younger, not kids, but younger guys, and there's less of them because they obviously learned it from their dad or somebody. They worked in an operation that when they were a kid, and now they're in their 40s or 50s. And here these guys now have moved up the line, and they're getting big dollars. You could take your degree and not do quite as well as you can now in the automotive restoration business. It's kind of like even, you look at plumbers and electricians today. We've got so many people that have gone off to college that are saturated with educated people, and we have not enough people that can change a tire.
And let's talk about that, because you've really done well for yourself.
I used to work on boats when I was in high school. First I was a boat washing, I'd wash boats and make money that way, and then I got a little better and I could start doing more mechanical stuff on boats and servicing them, and it actually I'd made more money than a lot of my buddies in high school, and I didn't mind working. I worked a lot of hours, and there was no such thing as quitting time. I was just I can get this done, and I didn't care what it took. And I finished high school, and I started in a college, and I I wanted to be a boat captain. And my dad was, he wanted to get into real estate. And so I was working with my dad a little bit, but I really wanted to be a boat captain. I found a maritime school to get my captain's license. And I thought, well, how am I going to tell my dad I want to be a boat captain? Because he's not going to accept that, because there's been an order in my house, you're going to college. Because no one ever went to college. So apparently I had to be the first, right? But it wasn't where I wanted to be. When I was supposed to be in my community college classes, I'd be driving down to my maritime class, trying to get my boat captain's license. And I planned it all in my mind. I was going to be a boat captain during the day and a bartender at night, and I was going to live like a king, you know? That's all I wanted, you know? And so I get called into my grades are just in the toilet.
Yeah, because you haven't been to class.
Because I haven't been to class. And I remember the administrator she says, Mr. Cyprus, I think your time is better spent elsewhere. And I said, I couldn't agree with you more. And so I had to go home and tell my dad that I quit school, and I think he realized by that time I was going to do my thing. And so I did get my captain's license, and then I started working on boats. But I stayed with the real estate side, and then again to the mechanical minded side that you picked up when you're a kid, because my dad wasn't mechanically minded. We were buying a lot of properties, and they needed to be renovated, and so I went off to got my contractor's license when I was younger, and next thing I know, I started fixing houses. Then I started building houses and building homes and building projects. You know, forward it 35 years, here we are.
So the real estate business, number one, is complicated, and there's a lot of ups and downs.
In real estate, there's always, you know, there's highs and lows, and you got good market times and bad market times. And I went through the 89-90 recession, which was not a big thing because I was working for others. And then when we get into 2006, 2007 recession, I'm running my own show, and things are on the downside. And the hardest part was I had to liquidate some assets to survive, and I had some fantastic cars that I had to say goodbye to keep the lights on. But you know what? At the end of the day, got a good family and great kids. So,
do you have like maybe an overview of what entrepreneurship has meant to you? I mean, it seems like it's come natural to you in your life.
I know that I'm really fortunate. I'm a lucky person. There's a lot of guys out there that work harder, but you know, you struck something. My kids both graduated USC. I was at a commencement speech, and Larry Ellison from Oracle, he said something that really struck me, and it was like wake up. He said, he was talking about all this life, how he had gone through, you know, his parents wanted him to be in medicine, and he had wound up in Northern California, and he had his ups and downs, and he got hooked up with Steve Jobs, and anyway, he found himself to be really good at computer programming. But he said that he really didn't enjoy what he was doing. He did it because he made money and he was good at it, but it wasn't something that he really wanted to do. And then all of a sudden, now Oracle's a gazillion-dollar company, and he really doesn't like employees, and he doesn't like the pressure, and he felt like he had not really enjoyed any of his career, and it was not what he wanted, and he wound up with a ton of money. During his commencement speech, he said, I've now realized the message I want to give to you kids that are listening to me. It turned out that it's not that you enjoy your job or you're happy with your job. It's that you're happy you did it. That struck a chord with me. It was like, it's really true. It's not, maybe everyone wants to have that dream job. I want to do whatever. I want to be really passionate about what I want to do, and it's got to make sense to where I really love it. No, it doesn't. You do what you got to do to get through, and you make your living, and you be happy that you did it after it's over.
And by the way, mistakes, you have to make mistakes. If you don't make mistakes, you're like, I think you were telling me the other day.
It's the only way I learned.
Yeah.
Yeah. Dumb guys, I'm the dumbest guy in the room. This is the mistakes are the best way to learn.
Absolutely. Yeah. Failure is an awesome teacher.
Isn't it?
There's a lot of tribalism in the car hobby. So you're either a Chevy guy or a Ford guy, but you kind of broke out of that mold.
Yeah, I broke out of that mold. I hang out with a lot of Huntington Beach Car guys, and A lot of them are the 70s now, they're 80s, and I've been hanging out with them for 25 years. And when I came on to the scene here in Huntington, I was into just General Motor cars. I didn't want to see anything else. And then the older you are in the car hobby, I think you're more open for crossing over. It seems to me like the younger guys, when they first come on to the collecting scene, they only stick to what they first learn, and then they know it, and then they stick to it. But every manufacturer had a point in time where they were king, and whether it was a Ford, a Chevy, a Mopar, whatever it be, there was a certain time that a certain year, a certain make, a certain model that was king. And you look at there's different points where Corvettes were king. I like glamour cars. The glamour cars were really interesting because they were constantly trying to one-up each other. You had from the 50s the Chevrolet up against the Fords, and when you came into the 60s, when things were really becoming more luxurious versus performance, we were really getting into luxury. The Cadillacs, the Lincolns, the Oldsmobiles, they were constantly trying to one-up each other, and so every year it was more and more.
Let's talk about these glamour cars. So what we're talking about is roughly from about 1957 up to about 1963, 64, right? Where the big three manufacturers were always trying to outdo each other, whether it was performance or luxury or how much chrome they could put on the car. What is it about them that you really enjoy?
Getting into the glamour cars is the bigger I've gotten, the easier I fit in them. The muscle cars are a little bit tighter, and they're a little harder riding cars, and also I got that out of my system when I was younger. But the glamour cars, to me, they're just beautiful. You look at the lines and the details and the chrome for days and the long panels. They're so pleasing to to eye, and but they're so
they're impractical for sure.
Totally impractical. Just to restore one, I mean, you might as well go buy yourself a entry-level Ferrari. I mean, you should really think about when you're restoring a car, where you're going to be at the end of the day when you're going to restore one, because glamour car restoration is a lot of times as much or more than any expensive European car.
So let's talk about the cars that are right here behind us. We've got a 1960 Cadillac Eldorado convertible, triple black, right? We've got a 61 Lincoln Continental, 57 Cadillac Eldorado Biarritz.
Yes.
And then next, a 57 Pontiac Bonneville. First year of the Bonneville, right?
First year, and a rare low production number. It was interesting because all of them were fuel injection, and there was mainly two colors. They were all basically
there's kind of an off-white, right?
There's like an ivory white, right? But it's an off-white, but they had either a red or a blue inserts in the interior, right? And there was 620 or something of them made, and there's a lot of missing VIN numbers when you go through it, because in order to get those things in production, you had to get 500 of them built, and so there's a lot of missing VIN numbers. So was there really 600 plus made? It may not have been. In the registry, I think there's about 50 of them, but that includes the ones in junk yards and everything else. On the road, maybe there's 20. I don't know.
Yeah. And then you've got a 57 Chevy Bel Air convertible, black with a black top and a red interior, and it's a Fuelie. Again, like you said, the rest of them are Fuelies too. These are like benchmark cars of the 50s.
And 57 was a really breakout time. That's so inclusive of Pontiac being part of General Motors and Chevrolet. You had the fuel injection. They'd come out. Think about it. They'd come out with a 283 cubic inch motor where they were matching up horsepower to cubic inches for the first time, and then they plopped on to the fuel injection units later on. But it was a breakout time. It was a performance really hit with that 283 motor. So you found it in the Bel Air. That Bel Air is a low horsepower. There was a low horsepower and a high horsepower. That one's a low horsepower, but and the Bel Air is really an iconic piece. It's there's so many of them out there. Production numbers were rather high, and a lot of them have been restored. And a lot of guys that collect them now are leaving the hobby due to age. So they're actually a declining value car, but it is an iconic car. You know, you look at all the old movies. There's always a '57 Chevy in it, and it's pleasing to the eye for so many people that haven't seen one in a long time. So it's a nice, neat car to have. The fuel-injected Corvette would have been their true first real performance car for Chevrolet, and then Pontiac, which was a step above. It was like Lincoln to Ford, you know, Lincoln's version. So Pontiac, they had the fuel injection unit inside the Pontiac, which was really a rare bird.
Yeah, and the GM divisions really furiously competed against each other at the time too. And even though there are similarities, they were all doing their own thing. Is there any preference with you between Ford or Chevy?
Not so much,
Yeah.
no. I grew up a diehard Chevy, then I have Fords and Mopars. And as far as the Mopars, the muscle cars go, they were very interesting because it was like build the biggest motor and put it in the lightest pile of crap you could put together, but do killer colors on it. I mean, think of it, even today, my daughter, when she was a kid, her first car was a Jeep, SRT8 Jeep, the Cherokee, I guess, right?
Yeah.
And so it had a Hemi in it, and she's a really good kid. And she never got in an accident one time. But she loved that car, and boy, that thing hauled ass. And so she graduates college, and her parting gift is like, listen, you got your college education, you got it all down. Here's your parting gift is I'm gonna get your car. What do you want? She goes, I want a Land Rover. So we get her a brand new Land Rover, like an LR3, and it was about 6 months down the line. She comes to me and she goes, she's got her big job now. She's working, and she goes, Dad, would you be okay if I got a different car? I go, what's wrong with the car you have? You know, she goes, I miss Miami. So she says, she goes, I found what I want. I'm like, oh yeah, what's that? She goes, I want a Dodge Demon. I go, honey, so Dodge Demon is a 1,000 horsepower car that is rare as hell, and you couldn't get one if you had the money. So why don't you set your sights, and I'm being sarcastic, set your sights lower. You know, they have this thing called a Hellcat.
Yeah.
She goes away, she comes back, Dad, I want a purple Hellcat. And I'm like, got a big job, sell your car, buy yourself a Hellcat, whatever. Okay, so we're up in Monterey. So there's this purple Hellcat. It's got 1,000 miles on it. I'm walking down the line looking at the cars in the auction, and there it is. And she goes berserk, and she's with us. And she goes, this is it. This is the car. So we wind up buying that car. She sells her Land Rover, gets a change check, and she's got her purple Hellcat, and she drives it today. And I get in that car, and it's pretty darn impressive.
Your car fascination is rubbed off on your kids. What
Well,
about
my daughter, my son, yeah, Jerry's out. He appreciates them.
Kip, I know that you're a guy who is not about keeping this collection to yourself. What do you like most about sharing it with others?
Okay, well, the first thing is, I'm going to quote a good friend of mine, Russ Lyons. He said to me one time, this is a friend of mine, he goes, these aren't your cars. They're just on loan. They're going to be someone else's cars one day. And that really struck me. And when people come to the car collections, there's a lot of car collections where the collector's like, no cameras, no nothing. Why? That you've got something that is fantastic, that truly it's yours, but it's not yours. It'll be someone else's one day. But you've got a piece of history and a beautiful piece of art that deserves to be shared with others. And so it doesn't matter if it's a Mercedes or a vintage Mercedes or a Ford, whatever it be. It's really important that you share it. And not only that, it's your responsibility in the car collecting hobby to try to promote it. Because if we don't promote this hobby and keep this hobby attractive, we're losing the audience. And for those who are in it for the money, in a sense of like hoping that their collections maintain their value, well then you should care about an audience, because if you're going to hide that car and not allow the rest of the world to see it, no one's going to know it exists, and it'll never be in demand if it's not known to exist.
Yeah, and there's a lot of collections out there that are under lock and key, and
It's a shame.
cars disappear for decades.
Mm-hmm. It's sad.
Yeah.
You know, they don't come out. Doesn't drive around. It's in a box. It's being hidden for the next owner to bring out one day, hopefully.
When people come in and see the collection, are they focused on maybe cars that they know, and what happens when you introduce them to a car that they really haven't had exposure to before?
Well, I really like to try to pull people from, if they're set in their ways on a certain car, say it's a Lincoln, it's a Mercedes, it's a Porsche. I try to really get them to open their mind, because it was quite liberating to me when I started crossing over into other manufacturers and started enjoying other cars, to show them a different car. You know, hey, you came here, maybe it's the Cadillac Club. Let me show you this Lincoln. You know, let me show you this little Porsche. And at first there's definitely you get there's some people that they've gone their whole hobby of just being focused on the specific manufacturer. But then if I can peel them off for just a moment and just introduce them to something else, listen, car guys are car guys. And if you're in the hobby, you appreciate it. You appreciate the finish. You appreciate the workmanship, the intricacy of all the the different kinds of manufacturers and cars, whether you're into that manufacturer or not. So when you start taking a guy that maybe is into Porsches and never saw past the hood of a Porsche, and you show him a Lincoln, and you go, look at this Lincoln. This was probably the biggest pile of crap ever made because it was so over-engineered. But look how much they did, and look at the craziness, and look how ahead of their time they were. And you get the guy to go, yeah, and he starts kind of looking at it. You know, he does a little resistant at first, but then they relax and you start showing them more. And then the next thing you know, the guy's at a car show where there's different kinds of cars, and he's got his buddy, and his buddy's a Porsche guy only, maybe, or whatever it is that they're into. And he goes, hey, look at that Lincoln over there. Come on over. I got to show you. And he shows his buddy a few things, and the guy's like, when did you get into Lincolns? And he goes, but the whole thing is you're spreading it.
Yeah.
You know, and so it doesn't matter what kind of car it is. I like to show people other kinds of cars because it's really, it's awesome.
Yeah, for me, I like the fact that you look at a couple different manufacturers, maybe the car's the same model year or at least the same era, and you notice a different approach to the same engineering problem. The other thing is, there was a time when you could tell at a distance at night what kind of car was going down the road in front of you or what was coming at you from the other direction. And now it's like virtually impossible.
Yeah, it doesn't hold today, does it?
No, they're all the same. I remember I actually felt a little bit embarrassed for myself. I was alone in my car and I thought, oh, look at that Mercedes coming. And you know what? It wasn't a Mercedes, it was a Hyundai. Oh man, well, doesn't say anything about me. It says a lot about where the industry is, the sameness. But it's also that the industry has that sameness. Jay Leno likes to say, he makes this point often, that 1967 was the last pure year for automotive design. And after that, a lot of regulations came into play, and they were tying the hands of the manufacturers. And I noticed that there are very few cars in your collection that are like post 1975 or so.
I do. They're not necessarily all here.
Right.
I do collect a little later model stuff.
Stuff like from when you were, like you were telling me about that 944 you were kind of interested in.
Yeah, and there's also, I loved late 80s Mercedes, like the 560s. When I was a kid, if you had a 560, like 86 to 89, those were only doctors and attorneys that had those cars.
Oh yeah.
And to me, I look at those cars and go, wow. And then when I was in high school, it's like, if you could afford a Camaro,
yeah.
oh man, you were king, you know.
Absolutely. That IROC Z.
Oh,
later
man.
on. Yeah.
1987. I remember so many times I went to the dealership and I was like, oh man, I went back and forth. I just can't afford the payment. It's going to be like, you know, $400 a month, and how am I going to swing this? You know, you add up the insurance and everything else. It's like, God, it's like $700. There's no way, you know. Like,
now you look at an IROC Z today. Does it hit you the same way? Because for me, I look at it one and I go, wow, that's really a pile of crap.
Funny, but no.
Really?
I till just recently, I found one that had like I found a 1989 IROC Z with 15,000 miles on a convertible, and I had it for about 10 years. I think I paid $20,000 for it, and everyone was like, "What do you want that for?" And I go, "Well, it just means so much to me, and I think it's the neatest thing I've ever seen." You know, to find a time capsule, because no one really had bought those or wanted to collect them yet. And I had it for about 10 years, and you know, when I went and drove it, it didn't give me the new exciting feeling that I get from driving some of the older cars that weren't in my radar screen.
Right.
But I still I look at that car today and I go, wow, to me, I love it. And you know, you touched on something. You know, the new cars are getting to be you know, real modern, and you know, you can't tell one from the next. That's just you and I, because there's these young kids today that do get every little thing, and they're picking up all the different specs. And you mentioned Leno. I've got a lot of good friends on the Peterson Museum, and I interact with it, and I do some stuff up there and with the Peterson. And there's a group called the Checkered Flag. It's a fantastic little club at the Peterson, and we had a club event, and Leno and a couple other big collectors were up there, and it was talk about the future of collecting and the values and cars. And one guy gets up there, I'm not going to name names, but he's up on the panel, and he goes, when does used Porsches become collector cars? And he's kind of laughing like a big shot, you know, not that he's not. And I'm sitting in a crowd, and I heard it, didn't think much of it. But then the kid behind me gets up, and probably about 30 years old, and it offended him. And he said, well, first off, the last year of a turbo Porsche where you could order everything this way, whatever, and that to me is a really special thing. And he went off on all the reasons why a late 80s Porsche is so important, because it was important to him. And it struck all of us, like, you know what, the younger generation below us, if they're coming on, they're going to come on to these things, and there's important things that are iconic to them that we won't care about, because it's not as rare to us as it is to them, because they might have been the kid in the back seat, or the little kid that was looking at the guy that bought that car when it was new.
Yeah, they're just looking through a different set of eyes. I mean, I think most of us are nostalgic for cars that were built sort of when we were teenagers, or cars that were starting to become classics when we were teenagers. I mean, for example, like, who would have thought that a lot of the Japanese cars would become collectible? And yet, here we are, right? I mean, look at the explosion of JDM cars coming into the U.S. That's a whole new scene.
But a guy that's in his 60s and 70s doesn't even tickle him at all.
No.
Me, I have a little bit of interest, but the generation behind me has a lot of interest.
Definitely.
And if that's what they're into, awesome.
How do you find your cars, and is the hunt an important part of the process for you? Because a lot of guys, they're into the hunt. Once they find the car, they sort of lose interest.
Well, it's a culmination of stages. You first identify the car that you want, that you're looking for, or maybe you're not looking for it because you thought it would never be obtainable, and then there it is, and you strike. And a lot of times there's remorse after that, but then there's excitement. But for me, most of the cars I've had to build, because every time I buy a car, you know, the smart way to buy a car is buy it done and buy the best. And if you can, you should. But that's really hard to find. You know, there's so many car flipper dealer guys out there that are, they put lipstick on them, they make them look good, and they send them off, and then you get the car and you pay a lot of money for it, and you realize, well, there's a lot of flaws in this thing, and then you're not happy. So I find myself most of the time either buying a really good car and then bringing it to a higher level, or starting with a good car that needs everything and then doing it from scratch. And I'm always into the cars for way more than they're worth at the end of the day. But there's a sense of satisfaction, and I really enjoy it. And that's part of my hobby enjoyment. Some guys like buying their cars, and some guys like building the cars. And I like building the cars, and I like using the cars. Buying it's the hard part, because you got to swallow the terrible tasting pill of paying for it. But I really enjoy the cars, and I love looking for hey, this part is like really rare and it's missing, or we need it. I'm just thrilled looking for it. I love hunting for it. What do you mean I can't find that part? Are you challenging me? We'll find that part, and I don't care where I got to go to find it. We're going to find it.
So building them, if you're building them, how important is it to you to kind of maintain the original spec on the car? Are you a guy who's not opposed to color changes or whatever? Or
it's more important to me today than it was in the past. So if I'm restoring a car today, I really want it to be. I found that when the car was built, and it was built in a certain way and delivered that way, it was probably the best way, because they did look at all the other options that we may think, hey, make the change. So I really love the originality of the way the cars were and in their original state, because that's when I think, when you look back, they're timeless at that point. Whenever you alter a car, you put a higher performance part on it, or you put something different that wasn't on the car, and my opinion is you're time stamping that car. You build a hot rod and you put a crate motor of whatever the latest and greatest was. Well, it's a timestamp. That motor was made at a certain time. So in 10 years down the line, when there's a better crate engine, and I look at that car, I go, well, that's a 10-year-old car.
Restoring a car is a huge undertaking. Every manufacturer is different, and guys specialize in a given manufacturer. So how have you gone about finding the right people over the years to do the work for you?
I never have one guy do the whole car. I like, generally, I'll use a common engine builder that is more of an engineer, that will be the same guy that probably has built in this warehouse probably 75% of the motors. But if I get into more of a specialty motor, like if I'm in a Ferrari or something that's odd, it might need to go to more of a specialist. But so I'll generally have motors built by a motor guy. The paint and body is done by the painter guy, and then you pick your specific assembler. So if it's a glamour car, I have got someone that's really good with glamour cars and muscle cars. But if I'm going into hot rods and customs, I got somebody that I really enjoy working with. He's fantastic. And then if it's a specialty car that it's new to me, like a Mercedes or something, then I'm going to go outsource to somebody that I'm going to search around and find somebody that's really good with that car, and I'm going to contract and work with them on the build and the reconstruction of it.
How do you find those guys in the first place, though? Is it mostly word of mouth from your friends, or?
Yes, it's word of mouth, friends, and you get bad luck. Some guys are, paint shops can be very difficult. They're on sometimes and they're off on others. You can do several cars in a row with one guy, and then does fantastic, and then all of a sudden the workmanship fades out, and you don't have as much good a luck, and it's expensive. You never come out on the right side financially on them, but if you can get it done the way you want it, it seems like it's a lot of money now, but when you do it and you do it right and you're satisfied with it, it's not as much money down the line when you look back. It's like, I'm glad it's done and it's the way I wanted it.
I know you want to keep the cars as authentic as possible, like you said, the way they were born, but inevitably there's a few little things that can maybe improve drivability, especially with fuel formulations that we have now. and things like that. Are there any little tricks that you like? For example, like electronic ignitions or anything like that?
There's a real simple, easy fix, and that is take the load off the motors. And I've been on a lot of cars. I've got a lot of boxes up in the rafters of gearboxes and transmissions. So I'll take it's not uncommon for me to take a later model or a more modern transmission and put it in place of the original, because what happens is I get better. You want it with better gearing. The engine's working less, so I can utilize the original motor and not work it so hard. And so when you see me running down the road in a '61 Galaxy, and I'm doing 80 in it, and the RPMs are like 1,600 or something like that, and the motor's hardly working, it's because I've got a better gearing system in it. Because
Right.
I think that's really the best place to make an alteration, to be able to run the roads that we run and not beat the devil out of the cars.
And you don't see that.
And you don't see it.
That's
But it's important to keep the original, so the next guy, if he ever wants to put it in there on a purist, he can. Yeah.
So do you go with a fairly late model transmission, or is it?
Grand Nationals,
Yeah.
the Buick, they were running those 200 R4s. That's a really great transmission for the automatics. So you can use a 200 R4, and they can build these 200 R4s now to take 1,000 horsepower. And you've got basically a lower first gear and overdrive. It's mechanical versus the 700 R4 was electronic. I like that for the automatics, and I even have been known to slip those behind some Fords and cross it up, right? I'll cross them up myself.
Can't see it.
Yeah, and then putting a 5-speed gearbox versus a 4-speed into a car. That's also another way to do it.
Do you have any cars with that Tremec 5-speed in it?
Mm-hmm.
How do you like it?
It's good.
Yeah.
It's good. It's the answer.
Yeah.
Even in the foreign cars.
Yeah.
67 Sunbeam Tiger. I was really contemplating on slipping a 5-speed in that, and I thought, that's a car that's really it's a 2, the Tiger, and it's a really rare car because it was at the end of the production of the Sunbeams, and so you had Chrysler had bought, I guess, Sunbeam at the time. So you have a Chrysler emblem on the side of it. You've got a Ford engine, and you've got a Sunbeam body. So I left that one alone. But I was really contemplating changing that because of the drivability. Because I like to go on drives. I like to do rallies, and when you're going to go do a 1,000-mile rally, fifth gear is nice.
Is there a favorite rally you've done, like a experience that stands out?
So far, the most incredible rally I've ever done, it was just magical, was I went to Israel, and I did the Holy Land 1000. It was the rally happened in 2016, and then they did it in 2018, and I don't think it'll return. But we shipped our cars to Israel. There was about 100 cars in it. It was fantastic. Wow, I did 1,100 miles around the entire country of Israel, and it was really magical. And I did it in a 1964 356. In Israel, everyone thinks it's a desert. It's not. It's beautiful. It has, there's big green mountain hillsides, and there's beautiful white sandy beaches, and then there is desert, but it's dry. We were constantly hydrating ourselves because you get dehydrated really fast in that weather, but it was beautiful. It was beautiful, and it was the right car to bring too.
Probably a lot of good camaraderie on the
Fantastic.
trip.
Met some unbelievable,
People from all over the world.
All over the world, and on these rallies you meet some really great people that gravitate you to other places. As a matter of fact, on that rally I met a really neat couple of people that I'm still pretty close to, and they live in Switzerland. I've met some fantastic people that when your interests are very similar, and you're mechanically minded, you're into the same things, it's easier to become and meet more people and friends with people. And I've got some fantastic relationships. the Peterson Museum has been really fantastic for meeting a lot of people. The face of that place, Bruce Meyer, is fantastic, and he's like a really dear friend to me, and he's introduced me to some fantastic people, other collectors that just like feel like some of these guys I've known my whole life.
It's almost like when you haven't seen an old friend for a long time, but it's the kind of person that you're close enough to that you guys pick up like you saw each other yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the same thing with car people. You know, I mean, a perfect stranger that has the same make and model car that you might be driving that day, you could pick it up right away, and I love that about the car hobby.
Yeah, and you know, and strangers, you say strangers, some of these rallies, you wind up. There's a lot of people back east, the other side of this country, that I only see on rallies. I have no connection to them with any club or any friends. It's just they happen to be on a rally, and then it's like, you know what? That's the same couple we met on the rally when we were on the East Coast doing our different rally, or in the Midwest somewhere, and then all of a sudden, you know, it's like, hey, we're buddies now. You know, I've seen you on a rally or two, and you get to know them, and you're switching numbers, and it's
cool to see a familiar
great
face.
connecting. You know, great connecting.
Yeah, I love it.